He predicted Trump's victory in 1924 before sociologists did. He predicted a war between America and Israel and Iran before the first missiles were launched. He has 2 million followers. The press has already dubbed him the Chinese Nostradamus. And this week, sitting in Beijing, 10,000 kilometers from Washington, he made 4 new predictions about the country I love. And a civil war in America. A secret deal between Washington and Beijing. A global surveillance state. He's talking about us and the war in Southeast Asia. His name is Jiang Xueqin. Jiang Xueqin. It sounds a lot like Xueqin. And before you decide whether we should be afraid of him or not, find out who he really is. So, Jiang Xueqin. He was born in 1976 in the southern province of Guangdong, I think. When he was 6 years old, his family did what millions of families did in the 20th century. They fled. They ended up in Toronto. That's why the story is that he lives in Canada now. His father was a schoolteacher in China. He got a job as a cook. He stopped by Kumadi and became an ashvia. It's a classic immigrant story, the very story that I heard. He lived through it when he left the Soviet Union in 1974. He worked as a guard in a women's dormitory, by the way. Soon he was kicked out. He sold electrical appliances in a store. He hauled things, worked as a loader, well, and so on. The boy turned out to be talented. He got a scholarship to Yale. And in 1999, he earned his bachelor's degree. Attention in English literature. Not in political science, not in psychology, not in economics, not even in history, not in international relations. Remember this, because, well, this will be important for understanding what's happening. In 2000, he returned to Beijing. Let me say this one more time. In 2000, he returned to Beijing. Well, okay. He wrote for the American Christian Science Monitor, the Hong Kong edition of the Far Eastern Economic Review in 2001 PBS. Very shunzu, sounds prestigious. From my point of view, it's disrespectful but prestigious. He was hired to shoot an underground documentary about labor protests in China. An underground film. So, in the city of Daqing, he was arrested. He was held for 2 days. And on June 5, 2002, he was expelled from the country. Well, just like a dissident. There, and now something that for some reason no one talks about. Beijing allowed him to return. And here you, knowing the Soviet Union, will say, what? By 2008, he was already leading educational reforms in elite Chinese schools. Today, he teaches philosophy and history at the Beijing Academy. So, moonshot, I think it's called. He has been living within the Chinese system for more than 20 years. He uploads videos online in which he predicts the fall of the West. He knows the West personally. He lived in Canada, studied in America. He knows, and he knows for sure that the West will fall. Let me tell you something based on my modest experience with the Soviet Union and studying other totalitarian regimes. He is allowed to speak. They leave him alone. I would even say this. On the contrary, he is actually supported for a very simple reason. He is doing something that the Chinese Communist Party considers useful. You have probably figured this out yourself. Even if in some ways he is a dissident, he is a tolerated dissident. We know this category, right? Yes? In his file and in their KGB, there is a stamp, "Do not touch, valuable asset." Jiang called his approach productive. No, predictive history. Predictive, right? Predictor. Predictive history. Of course, he took the idea from Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer who came up with the discipline called psychohistory. Psychohistory in Asimov's novels is the mathematics of the crowd. It claims that an individual person is too insignificant to matter in terms of historical movement. But a society of billions behaves predictably. I support the second part. You can predict how a crowd will behave in fear, outrage, happiness, and so on, and so on. It's doomed, so to speak, to move. The crowd follows predetermined paths. Once again, This part I understand and support. Add a layer, as he says, of game theory. Mix in some historical analogies. Athens before the fall, Rome before the fall. The British Empire. Compare modern America to Athens during the Peloponnesian Wars. Conclude that the empire is over. First, call it an empire and then say the empire is over. Well, that's really the whole method. And now, dear friends, listen carefully, because this is the most important phrase in the whole video.
Психоистория.
Psychohistory, Isaac Asimov, is not a science. It's a literary device, an invention from a 1951 novel. There is no equation that can predict what choice 333 million free Americans will make tomorrow morning. That prediction, that possibility never existed and never will. They had already said, so to speak, "Oh, it's over." What kind of science describes the principles on which relationships within human society are built? It's called volitional science in English, the study of relationships between individuals who possess free will. And the main words here, the key ones, are free will. As I mentioned earlier, Berdyaev said that personality cannot be comprehended by calculation. And I'll add that a person very often acts completely illogically. Well, that means you could say that the Chinese Nostradamus predicts the actions of large groups of people, but not of any specific individual. But the problem is that one specific person can completely turn around and change what the country thinks. We have an example like this in the US. Thomas Paine, I talked about him too, wrote a book. I think it was 5,456 pages, which he called Common Sense. So before this book came out, all the leaders of the American colonies wanted to improve relations with the British Crown. Thomas Paine's book became the best-selling and most widely read publication of all time among a population of 3 million who could read. There were 6 million people, and 3 million of them could read. 2.5 million people bought a copy of Common Sense. 2.5 million. Less than 3 months had passed since it was published. As everyone emphasizes, absolutely all the leaders of America declared that they wanted separation from Britain and would do everything in their power to achieve independence. Here is the impact of one person's actions. Try to predict how one book, which was published, suddenly it came out, I don't remember how many copies, not many, and then madness began. What effect will it have on 6 million people, of whom 3 million turned out to be literate? I want to be honest. I won't say I won't turn this person into a straw man. In May 1924, Jiang made 3 predictions in one of his videos, which he called the Iranian trap. First, Donald Trump will win the 1924 election. Second, during Trump's second term, 1924 is Trump's second term, America will go to war with Iran largely in the interests of Israel. And third, America and Israel will lose this war. There you go. Well, 2 out of 3, yes, Trump won, the war started. As for the third point, we can't say anything yet, although we see a complete military defeat of Iran. But it's quite possible that he, the Chinese Nostradamus, meant something else, because we haven't clarified the semantics, what he meant by lose and win. There you go. What he predicted is serious, yes, and I won't pretend otherwise, but I'll tell you something that journalists, especially those chasing a sensation, won't let you in on. Already in May 1924, the betting platform Polymarket estimated Trump's chances of winning at over 50%. In other words, someone looked at this, came out and said, Trump will win. Okay. By mid-1925, most bets were predicting an American military strike on Iran. Zion didn't just make up these predictions. It's not as if everyone believed one thing while he believed another. Most of those who were making predictions, what are predictions after all? It's an attempt to analyze the situation and say what the most logical outcome will be. Yes, most of these people were saying exactly what he said. He read the same odds that you and I can look up on our phones, and he spoke them into the camera with a deeper voice and longer pauses. That's not prophecy, that's called, well, in our language it's called repackaging. And now, about those viral conspiracies, the headlines are silent. He calls himself a professor. Well, it's a small thing, a little detail, but he's not a professor. He hasn't defended a doctoral dissertation, nor is his bachelor's degree in English literature from any American university. He wouldn't even have the right to teach a first-year course under that title. He's not a professor. He can call himself anything, but it's just a nickname, right? A handle. What's yours? Professor. Okay, Professor, let's go. The Free Press. The publication documented that Jiang was spreading theories about secret societies supposedly controlling the West. Illuminati, Masons, Jesuits, some little-known Jewish messianic movement from the 17th century called the Sabbateans. Well, like Sabbath, probably, yeah, Shabbat. He questioned the historical evidence of the Holocaust. So he said a lot of things, and 2 of them came true. He accused the state of Israel of ritual child sacrifices during the war in Gaza. Is that okay? Let that phrase hang in the air. This is a person whom 2 million people listen to when it comes to your country, your currency, and the future of your children. His critics, well, like the authors from Triple Ampersands, Splice Today, and Real Sciences, point out 3 patterns. He never shows his math. I act according to game theory. He's an English teacher. He's never studied math. He doesn't publish a single equation. Second, every structural conclusion he makes somehow flatters the Communist Party of China. America is falling, the West is falling, and China is rising. Always at the very top. And third, he lives in Beijing, ladies and gentlemen. He teaches in Beijing, films from Beijing, and his predictive history somehow has nothing critical to say about China. A prophet whose prophecies always benefit one country is not really a prophet, so what would we call him? A mouthpiece. This week on the podcast Diary of a CEO, Jiang made 4 new predictions. I'll list each one, and after each, I'll pause briefly for a response. Prediction number 1. The second civil war in America and a 3rd term for Trump. That is, both. He claims that Americans will turn their weapons against each other. He claims that Trump will return to the White House by one of 2 workarounds. A family member or Vice President Vance will win the election and then step aside for Trump. Or the Constitution will be suspended under the pretext of martial law. To write something like that, namely that Trump will run in the election as vice president. Vance is president, for example, or his son is president and he is vice president. Maybe only a person who has never read the Constitution of the United States of America in their life, as far as I know. The fact is that the Constitution of the United States says that all the restrictions placed on the candidacy for president also apply to the candidacy for vice president. That is, just as Trump cannot run for president for a 3rd term in a new election, he also cannot run for vice president. There is no difference in the requirements. The idea that the Constitution would be suspended under the pretext of martial law is also strange, by the way. Probably. Jiang read and heard about the Ukrainian Constitution, which allows elections not to be held during wartime, which immediately gives the president the opportunity to become president for life. A very easy way to never end the war. And of course, to pass your office to your son or daughter, for example. It's impossible to do that under the American Constitution. And besides, exactly half of the Republican Party won't even go to vote if Trump runs. If he runs for a 3rd time, half will turn out enthusiastically and half won't go. There. Well, and I suspect that if Trump does end up staying, then most likely the army will take to the streets. That's what the army leadership has sworn to do many times. And it's not about party affiliation, but about the fact that the psychology of the MAGA movement, plus the conservative part of the Republican Party, is exactly what fights against any encroachment on freedom, which, let's say, is actually derived from the Constitution. In other words, even though anything in life is probably possible, After all, knowing the psychology and the internal situation in the country, I can tell you that it's 99 to 1 that neither of the things Jin predicts will happen. The second prediction: a great deal between America and China. It's like a division of influence. According to him, everyone is wrong about Taiwan. China, he says, well, secretly just dreams that America would remain the world's policeman. They really want it because supposedly being an empire is very expensive for America. China will quietly finance Iran and Russia, while at the same time signing agreements with Washington. The predictions about China and Taiwan are a bit strange. It seems like he's trying to convince the West that China won't attack anyone, that China is a very peaceful country, that the Chinese don't hang anyone, don't spy on anyone, don't torture anyone, don't put anyone in camps, and don't kill anyone by the hundreds of thousands. They are nice, kind, fluffy, and secretly want America to remain the world's policeman. And right away, a reason is made up for why they want this. It's because by remaining the world's policeman, America spends a lot of money. And by spending a lot of money, America will soon go bankrupt. Well, if, for example, we Americans hadn't doubled our gas and oil production, well, not yet, but soon we will increase it. If we hadn't practically taken over the oil produced in Latin America, which brings us huge profits, I could agree that being the world's policeman is expensive, and therefore it's bad for America. But only America, being in this position, is now getting huge benefits under Trump. Well, and that doesn't mean you have to be America, right? Or like, America, yes. Okay, so does America want or not want to be an empire, right? America doesn't want to be an empire. If he had been paying close attention to what was happening in the United States of America, he would have learned that there is a modified and revised Monroe Doctrine, which was revised by Trump, and it actually prescribes for America, as its future steps on the international stage, so to speak, well, on planet Earth, to withdraw from many parts of the world, and to focus its attention on its own backyard, which Americans consider to be, well, somewhere around 23,000 kilometers around the borders of the United States of America. It smells, well, I don't know, it feels like what our dean is saying is a commissioned hit piece. Another important point is to understand whether communists can negotiate honestly. The answer is this: just as Islamists set as their goal the victory of their religion over all other religions in the world, and are ready to do whatever it takes to make it happen. In the same way, communists themselves have no intention of living by the laws they demand their country to live by. They have no intention of dealing honestly and fairly with the capitalists, whom they are determined to defeat by any means necessary. No, China, the Communist Party of China, will not keep its word. It will not. Let's turn to Berdyaev. A regime that cannot tolerate a free person within its own country does not keep its word given to a free nation. Ladies and gentlemen, how did he understand this? Well, obviously, everything was the same back then as it is now.
Предсказание третье.
Look, America will become a global surveillance state. Now listen carefully. He says that the whole world is moving toward digital identification and central bank digital currency and the monitoring of all online behavior toward what is already working in China, namely the social credit system, which assigns a score to every citizen. And then, based on that, you get more, you get less, or you don't get anything at all. He predicts that what is Chinese today will become global tomorrow. Well, there is a lot of positive in this for China, as you already understand, right? But what doesn't he say? He describes it as something inevitable, like a wave, like a tsunami, like something that just happens. That's it. Like the weather. Well, this is a lie. There could have been a misunderstanding before, but this is just a lie. A total surveillance state is not like the weather. A total surveillance state is a choice made by some people, accepted by others, and possibly rejected by a third group. Andrew Galambos taught that freedom is a scientific category, that ownership of one's own person and one's own thoughts is the foundation of any healthy society. Hillel said 2,000 years ago, "Do not do to your neighbor what is hateful to you." A surveillance state violates both the scientific and moral laws at the same time. It can be rejected. It needs to be. It must be rejected. It's clear that the arrival of new technology, the opportunity for the state to squeeze individuals whom it considers rabble, the people, and so on, will be taken very seriously by the state, and the state being aggressive. In democratic China, the communists, in Iran, the Islamists, in the United States of America, the democratic socialists will want to monitor and control the people. And probably there will be attempts, especially since we know about the act, the Patriot Act, which was adopted during the time, well, when Bush Jr., who believed that we definitely needed to be protected in exactly this way. Well, you remember, right, the famous saying that when you choose security over freedom, you end up with neither. That's a practical law, although it's hard to prove it scientifically. It's possible, but difficult. Nevertheless, in a country where the importance and value of freedom are passed down from generation to generation, and where each generation is taught and instilled with a hatred of lack of freedom, there will be no total surveillance. There will be attempts, but not to the extent that regimes can allow themselves. In Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and even in EU countries, it can be done, but in the US, it's most likely impossible. It's most likely impossible. Prediction number 4. War in East Asia. He calls it almost a banality, meaning Europe is at war, the Middle East is at war. Not Africa at war, but East Asia, he says, is just the missing fourth front. Honestly, I don't know what kind of law this is, that there must be 4 fronts. I don't know if this is the 4th front or not. I don't know how all this fits into the bigger picture. I know one thing. Since the moment Moses came down from the mountain, 3,500 years have passed, and during that time the world has been at war for 93% of the time. Not in strikes, not in fights. Not in shootouts, in wars. I'm talking about wars. For 93% of the last 3,500 years, the world has been at war, sometimes in several places at once. So the missing 4th front, or the lacking 4th front, I don't know. So far, we haven't come up with a way to solve our problems that's different from the way Cain solved his problems with Abel. Right? Right? The chance that the world will perish is increasing not just every year, but every second, and someday we'll blow ourselves up. The task of the science of freedom, the science of relationships between individuals who have the freedom to make decisions, or as we sometimes say, the freedom of choice, is to find other ways to solve our problems. Because if 300 years ago we tried to kill each other and solve our problems with arrows, spears, and swords, now it's far beyond cannons and rockets. Now it's poisonous chemical and bacteriological weapons, superatoms, I don't know, and everything else. If it goes off, it will most likely end life on the planet for the next 2,300,000 years. So far, we who were created in the image and likeness haven't found this way. But Andrew Galambos started somewhere in the middle of the last century in the city of Los Angeles. This is his science, the one I've mentioned all along. A science that can give us a solution. And because we're already moving in this direction, by the way, we've already recorded a whole course as an introduction to this science. Yes, 10-minute videos, about 200 of them. I highly recommend downloading my book, which is free there, and after that, you'll receive a 10-minute video every morning, perfect for coffee or for those who smoke cigarettes. I envy those of you who smoke. I myself haven't smoked since I was 40. Well, I really enjoy watching successful people. That's actually why I started smoking when I was 15, because I really like that whole thing. Sitting, coffee, cigarettes. Well, what can you do? So, and now, friends, what you might call the deepest criticism, the Jiang method. Assume that a person is a billiard ball. Push him there with a cue at the right angle and he'll roll where you told him to. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, cycles fall, they turn around. Nothing that a single person does, says, prays, builds, refuses to do, sort of changes the outcome. This is not history, this is determinism. That's a word, right? Determinism in a tweed jacket. Nikolai Alexandrovich Berdyaev, a Russian philosopher, a man who saw with his own eyes how his country fell into doubt. He wrote about it from exile. He taught us the way back. He taught that the individual is a unique miracle of the universe. Not the collective, not the state, not the government. The individual is a unique miracle of the universe. That one free conscience can break a chain that 10 million bayonets cannot break. Andrew Galambos taught the same truth in another language. Voluntary science, that's probably how it would sound in Russian, right? Volitional science. The science of a person who freely chooses their own path. Ownership of one's own life, ownership of one's own thoughts. Conditions under which a free society is not a sentimental dream, but a structural inevitability. Provided that a person chooses it. I'm not talking about the act of voting right now. Jiang predicts collapse because he has erased the free individual from his equations, but I, ladies and gentlemen, refuse to erase you. And here is my prediction. I can't say what Polymarket will show next month. I can't say what J.D. Vance will do. Whether the markets will hold and where the next war will break out. I really hope the markets will hold. I have a personal need for that. But I can tell you something that Jiang Xueqin will never tell you. Simply because he doesn't believe in it or pretends not to believe. The future of freedom does not belong to empires. It does not belong to war or currencies. It does not even belong to surveillance machinery. No matter how smart, how global, or how expensive they are, the future of freedom belongs to people who today, this very week, choose to live by the law of Guillory. Do not do to others what you would not want done to yourself. To people who teach their children to think. To people who build small communities of decency and then bigger ones. And then a society of the golden rule. A society built around a free, sovereign, and conscientious individual. Because conscience, if we build such a society, will be beneficial. This is not a prediction, it's an invitation to dance. The Chinese Nostradamus sees collapse. I see you and I bet on you. But I have one more small but important set of predictions. Jiang Xueqin has spoken many times about the war in Ukraine. And, dear friends, here his impartial game theory drops the mask. It was exposed, as they used to say, the beastly nature. Jiang literally claims the following. First, Russia had no other choice but to invade Ukraine. This is the year 1922, and he doesn't touch on anything before that at all. According to him, it wasn't aggression, it was self-defense. That's the Chinese approach, right? Second, Putin allegedly made several proposals to join NATO, but they were rejected. That's why Moscow was forced to respond. Third, Ukraine, I quote, has ceased to exist as a nation. From 1 to 2 million dead men, millions of refugees, the country, according to him, is divided between the historically Russian East and the traditionally Polish West. Fourth, Russia is winning, NATO is losing, everything has already been decided. Fifth, here. And here he approaches a city that, for many of us, is tied to the faces and names of relatives and the graves of our ancestors. Jiang states, Odessa is the main target of the Russians. Odessa is the last battle. NATO will collapse in Odessa because NATO will take on the responsibility of defending it. Russia will surround it, block it, and NATO won't be able to withstand it. And finally, in one of his interviews, he adds, it's possible that Russia's advance on Odessa is a tool to force Europe to declare mobilization and call people into the army. That is, Russia wants Europe to declare mobilization and call people into the army. Friends, I want you to hear me out calmly right now. This is not game theory. This is not structural analysis. This is not predictive history. This is just a restatement of the Russian Foreign Ministry's positions. Let's translate from Russian to English. Or maybe first into Chinese and then from Chinese into English, packed in a stylish, as I already mentioned, jacket, and delivered to the Western viewer by a person with a Chinese passport from Beijing. Not from Canada, not from America, not from Free France, from Beijing. So, greetings from Beijing, Free Rabinovich. Sure. And most importantly, there isn't a single Ukrainian in this analysis. There's no mother from Kharkiv in it. There's no old man from Mariupol in it. There's no child who's been sleeping in the subway for the second year. An entire nation in his equations exists only as if it were already over. And what he gave us isn't a prophecy, it's a cynical accounting of the dead. Beautifully put, by the way. It turned out to be a cynical accounting of the dead. I actually think so too. I believe that Ukraine will not be able to win back the areas that have been captured by Russian troops. And Ukraine will have to give up some territories to Russia in order to stop the war. Will the territories be smaller than those that have been captured? Will they be exactly along the line of capture? Or will something be added to them that Russia hasn't captured yet but might capture? I don't know. I swear, I don't know. The moment will come, though it may take thousands or even hundreds of thousands more Ukrainian deaths. Applause. Public opinion in the country will shift towards stopping the slaughter, and peace will have to come at the cost of giving up part of the land. And this will become such a prevailing opinion in Ukrainian society that it can no longer be ignored. But the end of the nation is only possible if the team currently governing Ukraine decides that they will defend Ukraine's territory to the last Ukrainian. And then indeed those very people, those who will later go to the West or take advantage, the very same people who will later go to the West to enjoy the billions they stole, together with the leaders of Western European countries and the U.S. Democratic Party. If they manage to do this, then they will achieve what the enemies who attacked Ukraine from all sides couldn't achieve for centuries. And now, an incredibly simple history test. Take a pencil. The year is 1900. Around you is a world of empires, the gold standard, stagecoaches, telegraph, and European aristocrats dancing at balls. No one, not even the smartest professor at Oxford or Harvard, can predict what will happen in 20 years. 4 empires will collapse at the same time. 10 million young people will fall in the trenches of the First World War. And Russia will lead to fantasy, the rise of people who will claim to represent the goals and aspirations of entire social classes. No predictive history saw this coming. Let's move to the year 1940 now. Germany is at the height of its power. Hitler is the master of the continent. Show this world to any professor and ask them to predict what will happen in 20 years. He won't foresee Nuremberg, the Marshall Plan, a divided Berlin, or the German economic miracle. He won't see that a country considered historically Prussian and doomed to aggression will become a model of peaceful democracy in Europe in just one generation. 1960, the Soviet Union seems eternal. Khrushchev promises to bury capitalism. Sputnik of space. Show the predictive historian this whole Kuzka's mother thing. The year is 1960. Ask him to tell you what will happen in 20 years, and in 30 years that in December 1991, the empire that seemed indestructible, it will disappear with a single stroke of the pen. It's gone. No Jiang Xueqin would see this change. 1991. The end of history. Fukuyama writes that liberal democracy has won forever. Show him September 11. Show him bin Laden, 2 wars in Iraq, the rise of China, COVID, central bank digital currencies. He didn't see anything. Nothing. The year 2005. None of the analysts predicted the financial crash of 2008, the Arab Spring, the annexation of Crimea, Brexit, or Trump. The year 2020. None of the experts predicted what we are seeing today. A light breeze of socialism blowing over the United States of America. Socialism in America. A country that was built as an anti-socialist project. Friends. Every 20 years the world becomes unfavorable. Friends. It's not a coincidence. It's some kind of internal law. Maybe not exactly 20, maybe 17.5, maybe 14.7. But this law works. Do you know why? Because there is free will. Because we are not billiard balls. Jiang doesn't understand this law. Jiang is afraid of it. Because free will is exactly what makes predictive history impossible. A person is not a molecule in a gas. A person wakes up and chooses how to live each day. Sometimes he decides heroically, sometimes despicably, sometimes foolishly. In fact, very often foolishly. But he decides. And in these billions of decisions, every morning a world is born that no computer, no game theory model, no professor from Beijing can predict. That's why all predictions that claim to be accurate are foolish. Not because the predictors calculate poorly, but because they have left out the main player from their formulas, a free, unpredictable, morally responsible human being. And that's why I'm an optimist. If this analysis was worth your time, do 3 things right now. Click subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube algorithms behave very strangely with channels that don't agree with the prevailing negativity. Second, share this video with one person. But do share it with a person who is afraid of the future, not with 3, with 1. Quality is more valuable, believe me. Quality is more valuable, and quantity too. Third, leave your own answer to the 4 predictions of Jiang in the comments. I read the comments, I reply. I try to reply, but when there are several hundred on each video, it's hard to answer them all. But I try. Until next time, this was Leon Weinstein, and remember, freedom is not predicted, freedom is chosen.